Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Lou Peck, and I am absolutely delighted to have Nathan with us today. We are going to talk about staying motivated in challenging times. This is a live session, so in case you hear any other noises, because as you all know, working from home around the COVID-19 pandemic has been quite challenging for many of us. So there may be the occasional odd noises that we have no control over, but then that does demonstrate that this is live, unless you're watching the recorded version, of course. Nathan joins us from Malta. He's out on his roof, and it's a beautiful day there, as it is here in South Wales. I know that we've had a number of people that have registered for this webinar, and you're from all over the world. So it's fantastic to see such a broad coverage of people that are registered. I met Nathan many years ago when I grew up in Malta during my teens, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but for a number of years we've known each other, and most recently Nathan's been my business coach because he is absolutely fantastic. Now, what I'd just like to say is that we do have a chat area. Bear with me a moment, I'm just going to move my slides along. We do have a chat area that if you have any technical issues or you want to ask me something, then please do put that in there, as I'm going to be here on the call. You won't see me on the video because I'll turn that off, because I want you to be concentrating and paying attention to Nathan. But also you'll notice that there's a Q&A area, and if you have any questions at any time of what Nathan's talking about, and just pop them in that area, we're going to cover those at the end of the session. But if you pop them in as soon as you think about them, it means you won't forget them. Now, if we don't happen to get time to address any, then we'll reach out to you directly. That's no problem. So do make sure that you interact with us. Yeah, so Nathan's going to do his session. We're going to have some takeaways. He's going to talk about some strategies. You can see him standing there, and he's got his board ready to go. So it is going to be an interactive session, certainly on his part, and we're going to be joining in that too. And then, as I mentioned, the end bit of this session is the Q&A. So do add in any questions that you have, and even if you add them into the chat box, I'll still pick them up, because I'll run through them with Nathan at the end, being that we all have time. So I'm now going to hand you over to Nathan. So thanks so much, Nathan.
Thank you, Lou. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start with sharing a little video from my screen. Hopefully the audio works well too, which is a little bit of a sum up of my philosophy. And it really takes a sporting approach to strategy, which is fundamental for me in the way that I run my businesses. And I hope there are some ideas there that you could take home. But the idea is that it sets the scene for the rest of the session and the hour we're going to spend together. So I'm going to work on this, and hopefully it does what it should. Firstly, I need to start by sharing screen, choosing the right one.
Attempting an impossible challenge requires a high degree of self-confidence and risk-taking. You're admired if you succeed, or a fool if you don't. I've discovered that my mind is able to take my body further than most people can, through determination and mindfulness training. At a marathon, your legs are already fed up. They want to give up. At 200 kilometers, it's your mind that keeps you moving on relentlessly. It's important to be self-aware, with strong support from those that you love around you. I think about why I'm here, the difference I can make raising funds and awareness through my challenges, and I love being in nature. I love being out there.
So I hope the video worked okay. There are two types of challenges in life. The ones in your environment, the ones out there, and the ones in your head. And essentially the ones that we can really make a difference on are the ones that are inside of us, and the way that we think and the way that we perceive the world around us. But let's start with the external environment. You know, we talk a lot about the VUCA world and the complexities of today in the pandemic situation, and how people are reacting to that, and how different countries are reacting to that, and how business versus politicians versus the general public behave in this external environment, which is common to all of us. However, we all, again, react in a different way. So what does this mean to a business person or someone who is trying to make sense of this in what they can do to become proactive? Because the biggest danger in situations like this is your external environment becomes your internal environment, which means that you basically become subdued or controlled by the external factors. To simplify it, if it's a good day, then inside I'm happy. If it's a bad day, then inside I'm sad. That is the main issue. How do we separate and control our internal environment to be able to manage the external environment? Because often we cannot change the external environment. If I ask you a rhetorical question, you're in a fast car, you're driving 100 miles an hour down the motorway in a straight line, and the brakes fail, the brakes go, and you are in this desperate and very risky situation. Despite this external environment, which is putting you in peril, where would you rather be sitting? In the passenger seat or holding the steering wheel? Now, whenever I ask this to audiences, I always get at least 90% or more saying, I'd rather be behind the steering wheel. And that's because when we have a sense of control, we feel less stressed. This is the fundamental principle between micromanaging, where we try and delegate some work to people, but we feel they're not doing it to our like, and we pull it back, we claw it back. When we ask someone to do something and we think they're not doing it as well as us, we lose control because we've given it away, and then we feel less stressed if we do it ourselves, which leads to busyness and us being overwhelmed with the amount of work we can do, particularly as leaders, because we don't delegate enough, perhaps because we don't trust that someone can do it as well as us. And again, this is the same principle of the external environment conditioning our internal environment. And I want to share a little bit of tools which have come through my experiences of being in desperate situations. I've been fortunate to tackle some of the world's toughest endurance challenges. I've run across the Sahara Desert, I've run around mountains, I've swam across seas, I've run 100-milers and more than that. And everyone has a different story. And typically what happens is at some point you hit a wall. And it's not a physical wall, obviously, it's a mental wall. Your legs have given up way before that particular number of miles that you've run, cycled, or swam. It's the voice in your head that is that wall. It says, okay, you've had enough, stop, go home, take it easy, take the easy route. So being cognizant of how that voice pops up and when it does and what to do with it is critical for us to be able to control the internal versus external environment. So in a way, it's a little bit of a battle. Remember when we were kids, we used to watch Tom and Jerry, and you know, you had Jerry who was being talked to by a devil on his shoulder, the voice in his head saying, you know, Tom, go and catch the mouse. And then you had the other voice, the angel on the other side saying, no, let him be. And these voices, this devil and angel in our head, are always playing competition, and we're stuck in the middle. Should I do it? Should I do not? Should I take a risk? Should I take the easy route? Should I push my limits? No, that's too risky. Take the easy way out. So this battle is there. Now, one of the things I like to use, before I was talking about the complexity of the situation we're in, which is our external environment, this VUCA world, and it's strange that if you think about the various components, and there's plenty of this on Google, I'm not going to try to teach you to suck eggs, is that the most difficult things are the ones that are highly volatile, because they are very limiting in predictability, you know, what you can do to think about what might happen, okay? And also there's a lot of gray areas around the knowledge you need to be able to manage a situation. So a book word represents volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But with our intellect, with enough knowledge and resources and information, we can manage complexity. With enough internal resilience, we can probably manage an element of ambiguity. And uncertainty is something that we're getting used to because the world is so ever-changing and fast-changing. So the volatility, which combines all of those, is what makes it extremely difficult to manage your own self in a situation like the pandemic we're in, COVID. One of the tools I use is very simple. And I'm gonna see if I can, yeah, I might have to do it this way. So I talked about your steering wheel, right, in that fast car. And the idea here is that when you're in control, when you're holding that steering wheel, you feel less stressed. So when I'm in control, my stress level goes down. So I am planning an event and I'm dependent on the weather because it's outdoors. I have no control over the weather, so therefore I start to get stressed. And I'm constantly looking at the weather report to try and forecast how it might be for me to be able to somehow mitigate some sort of action. Or I can take control and say, I'm going to move my event indoors, therefore I don't have to worry. So we're constantly trying to take things that are out of our control and move them in. We're trying to look at our environment and say, okay, what are the threats out there? What's the volatility? What's the uncertainty? What's the complexity? And try and make sense of it. And making sense of it is bringing it into our center of control. And when we do that, we may feel less stressed, but we start to get overwhelmed. We get busier, we have more things to juggle, we have more headspace taken up with trying to manage all of this in our head to try and somehow mitigate the risks that are out there. And so we can do this to a point, but then what happens is that stress starts to fill up our metaphorical stress bucket inside of our heads, and that fills up over time. And if we don't release that, it's just going to burn us out. Once that bucket is full, then you start losing your ability to make decisions, you start getting clouded vision and foggy thinking, and it starts to affect your decision making and your rationality. So the danger in taking on too much of the external environment onto you and trying to control everything. So what do you do? If you can't move that in there, or you want to try and avoid moving it in there, what do you do with it? What you definitely cannot do, excuse the noise of the paper, what you definitely cannot do is leave that there. Because when this is outside of you, it's causing an increase in stress. And so therefore, you must move it. You must, whatever is outside of your center of control, you must influence. You must put pressure on, you must put effort in moving it out of this ring. This is where stress starts to accumulate because you have no control. Now, if you move it in, you gain some control, but you get overwhelmed or burnt out. The idea is here that we think about ways to moving it out. And we move it into the space of acceptance. Now, this does not mean that we just ignore an issue. It doesn't mean that we just put it out of sight so it's out of mind. But we think about accepting a situation that you cannot put control over, you cannot gain control over, or you've done enough to influence it that beyond pushing further loses its scope. So to use the same analogy before with the weather, okay, I've got my event, it looks like it might rain, I'm outdoors, I can take control and bring the event indoors and reorganize everything, or can I accept that people are going to get wet and perhaps ask them to bring an umbrella or a raincoat? Either of those, one is going to require more work, one is going to require an element of acceptance. Sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping it doesn't rain, is just going to stress you out. And this is a very simple metaphor, but we can use that analogy in most situations. There was a situation when I was running through Europe. I set a world record. I was running a marathon in every EU state back to back. So the idea was to run a full marathon of 42 kilometers in every single EU state, 27 days in 27 countries, running a marathon. And the idea was obviously to raise as much money for charity as possible. And you do whatever you can that in your control to be able to plan. So your planning stage is here in the center. Okay, I know what I have to do. I know the route. I know where I need to stop. I know where I'm going to sleep. I know how I'm going to get from A to B. I have contingencies for when that doesn't work out. So I've got a plan for that too. And knowing that I have a really, really good plan that's well organized and well structured and really researched means that I can go into this challenge, this event, with the least possible amount of stress. Whereas if I'm going there and I'm winging it, my stress level is going to be much higher every time I encounter a problem. So planning is extremely important. Now, in times of COVID, what we're talking about is planning for the exit. We're planning for the new world. We're planning for what I'm going to do next. We're planning how I'm going to mitigate the risks, perhaps that's affecting my business today. Planning gives us a sense of control. And so in a situation like this, where your environment is unpredictable, is volatile, one of the best things you can do to grab that steering wheel is to plan, is to use the time that you've got, perhaps because you're not so busy at the moment because work is slow, to be able to plan. Because plan helps you move forwards mentally with much less stress. Now you might say, it's so volatile, we can't plan. I can think of some ideas, but if I don't know when this is going to open, when this is going to end, how can I plan? And so that's where you start to create your scenarios. Because if you created scenarios and you look at the triggers that would move into each scenario, you can recognize those triggers early and say, so this is happening, therefore it's plan B. Oh, so this is happening, maybe I need to move therefore to plan C. So using time to plan at this time is a very good way to get the right brain waves going in order to be proactive and productive. Rather than be out here, out of sense of control and feel a little bit helpless and get stressed and start to build that stress up over time. Then the inevitable happens. So you've got your plan, but it doesn't work. We were in a motorhome and someone broke in, stole our sat-nav, stole all our kits, and damaged the vehicle. It's an unpredictable. You could not have, well, we could have perhaps thought of it. Maybe we had some insurance cover, but you can't really plan for things that are so unpredictable. So what do? You panic, or you say, okay, in this current situation, what do I do next? And you mitigate that hopefully with a scenario that you had already thought about, or you improvise. But when you're improvising, you're being creative. You can't be creative in amygdala hijack. I mean, if you are so worried and so stressed out, you cannot be creative. The brain doesn't work the same way when you are in fight or flight response. So using creativity in the space of influence, again, triggers the right parts of your brain to stay positive and be proactive. But then there are things which are much more complex. On 26th marathon, I had just run the Greek leg of the marathon after having been running for 26 days, nearly 1,000 kilometers. And there's a strike at the airports. And the only way I can get to my 27th marathon, which is in Cyprus, is by plane. It was going to be impossible for me to get there in any other way within the 24 hours required for me to be able to set this world record. And there I was sitting in an airport at 1 o'clock in the morning on the day that I was supposed to run my last marathon with absolutely no clue whether the flights were going to be reinstated. And so I was very much out here. There was nothing I could do to control, or I felt. So I'm sitting here getting very stressed out. And so what do? You can keep getting stressed out, or you can say, what can I do that's in my control? I can control my own self. I can lower my worries. I can do some breathing exercises. I can stretch. I can get some rest, which I desperately needed. And that's something I can take care of. It doesn't solve my problem, but at least I'm being proactive. Or, as well as, moving into acceptance of the fact that unless I actually get my pilot's license and steal a plane, I'm not going to get to Cyprus. And so you leave it in the hands of fate to a certain extent that this is something you're going to have to wait out. Now, you could argue that all your plans were dashed and you know, all this was for nothing, and we didn't manage to accomplish the world record. But at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do about it. So accepting that, it allows you to move on. So despite everyone else, you know, I had a mini crew with me being very, very stressed out. I seemed to be quite serene. And this was because I accepted the fact that there's nothing more that I could do except do what I can do, what's within my head. Fortunately, at 5 o'clock in the morning, the pilots went off strike, and we flew to Cyprus, landed, drove to the start of the marathon, ran 42 kilometers, and managed to finish the feat. So, you know, there's an argument of staying positive is usually sort of karma comes around. We were doing a good thing, you know, raising money for charity, so it worked out. But there have been times when it didn't, and you just have to accept that you cannot control everything around you. So this is something I use in business too. The idea of looking around me and saying, with my energy and my effort, which is finite, hands up who has more than 24 hours in a day. We have 24 hours to divide between work, play, and sleep, you know, typically 8, 8, and 8 by way of hours. What can I do with my productive time? I can sit around fretting around stuff I can't control, or I can put my efforts, my mind, my hands into things that I can. Planning was one example. It could be sharpening my skills. It could be keeping physically fit. It could be learning a new technique. It could be reaching an old network. It could be doing my marketing. It could be doing all the long list of things that I said I would do one day when I have time. And that in itself, even if it is not necessarily revenue generating, you know, someone might say, well, you know what I need to do at the moment? I need to earn some money, and there's nothing I can do to earn money. It still means that it could allow you to be able to raise your game in the future. So there's an acceptance of the situation, and then there's a question of what can I do to influence this particular thing that's a thorn in my side that I need to remove. And this productivity allows us to actually move stuff out of our headspace to create new headspace. And then we use this new headspace for thinking up strategies and new ways of moving forwards. So this is a tool that I find extremely useful, and it's so useful because it's simple. It's CIA, yeah? Control, influence, and accept. And I just go through that process. And I teach this to the CEOs that I coach as part of Vistage, but also my team. My senior team, when they come to me and they say, we have a situation, it's desperate. I say, okay, within the scenario, what can we control? What can we do? What can we influence that's out of our control? Is it a customer issue? Is it a technology issue? Is it a government issue? Is it a political issue? Is it a bank issue? Can we influence there? What effort can we put into influencing? And then what do we need to accept? And that automatically changes the mindset. It flips the mindset of that person who's perhaps panicked or in flight or fright. And it starts to allow them to think about creative solutions. Whereas before they were so blocked by the terrible situation, the cortisol flooding their brain and stopping their rationality. So there is a big benefit in going through this 3-step process. What I also find is that when we look at things too microscopically, so when we look at too much detail, perhaps we can't see the wood for trees. And what I found is that in many situations that are complex, stepping back is a very good way to get some sanity, to understand really what is going on, and to get some better perspective. So if you are in a situation where you are really sort of going down that rabbit hole of the issue, whether it's, you know, the situation I had recently where I'm looking at how am I going to pay my staff? I have 70 people in the organization. Our revenue streams were severely hit by the pandemic, and what were my choices? You know, the panic situation could be, right, I need to cut costs, I'm going to chop some heads, I'm going to reduce my headcount. The other alternative might be we're all going to take a hit. But there are some creative solutions that I hadn't automatically thought about in that particular situation because I was talking about money. Whereas actually, if I step back, I said, okay, where do I want to be when this ends? I want to have my best people still around. Okay, I want to be able to have enough money to be able to pay them. Okay, so that they stay. Yeah, and I want to be able to market myself to be able to go back out there. But so is everybody else. So how can I think differently to have an advantage when we move out of this pandemic? And so having this ability to step back and take a deep breath, and sometimes you actually physically need to do that. You need to go for a quiet walk or get some exercise or fresh air just to distance yourself from the issue at hand. And working with CEOs as a coach, I find that the good ones are the real ones that are very, very quick to be able to distance themselves from the real situation that is taking up their headspace, to be able to step away and stay rational rather than getting sucked in. And it doesn't mean that you don't roll up your sleeves, you know, and really work on something to be able to solve the problem. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but that is the second step. The first step is to look away, to step away and say, okay, what is the real problem? Where does my energy need to be put? Before then diving deep. And one way I do that is by working through a very, very simple model, a little bit similar to this, but that is, to a certain extent, a fulfillment tool. So it stops you from looking at micro detail to be able to stay on big picture in a way that it looks at 4 different elements. And these 4 elements are very simple, and as I explain them, you will all recognize them for yourselves. But because you put them in combination, you tie them together, what you get is something that's much more purposeful. We call it the FIRE model. And for me, it's been 6-7 years of experiences that have allowed me to fine tune and build, and sometimes, you know, break down and rebuild this model. And as much time working with CEOs through it to test it out and see if it makes sense. So what I'd like to do next is share this with you. And I'll share it in a theoretical perspective, but I'll try and put some storytelling in so it makes sense. So just to recap so far, we've talked about the external environment and how this imposes on us if we let it, how we can regain control of ourselves and focus on the things that we can control, what's in our head, our mindset, the way that we think, how to make sure we have enough headspace, so distancing ourselves from the issue, finding alternative ways to look at something creatively, not getting sucked in to the fight or flight response or the panic that may be caused by the external pressure. Now, how do we make sense of this in a holistic way? And this is where the FIRE model, I find, is quite useful. So FIRE is an acronym. F is for flow. Flow is it's a mental state. Okay, so it's described by scientist Csikszentmihalyi, who researched happiness. So what makes people happy? And what he found from 10,000 interviews around the world to high performers, to rich people, poor people, different age groups, was that there seems to be one thing in common. People are happiest when they're in their own head, doing something they love. Okay, so this is what he described as being in flow. So when we are being productive, doing something that's deeply absorbing, where we can put our full attention to it, we are playing at our best. Our brain is firing those dopamine chemicals and allowing us to really block out our external environment and become within ourselves, within our head, much more focused. So in times where the external pressure is at its most, that's where you want to find flow. So flow, the F in FIRE, is imperative for your own personal achievement. And getting into flow requires a number of triggers, we call them. So Kotler and Wheel talked about 17 different triggers that they recognized in Olympic athletes and top CEOs and artists and musicians that get them into this zone. And these are things like stopping distraction, making time to focus, making sure that you are physically in the right condition to be able to take that effort. But more importantly, that actually the challenge you are about to undertake is slightly out of your comfort zone. It's just beyond you. And why is this important? It's important because what happens is if you go too far, if you take a challenge on that is too big, what happens is you don't get flow. You become resistant to it. You start to push back. You actually retract into your metaphorical shell to protect yourself. So what we're saying here is that you need to be able to find some conviction that the challenge that you are facing is just slightly out of your comfort zone. On the other hand, it can't be too easy, because if it's too easy, our brain doesn't get that dopamine, that adrenaline, that sort of cocktail of neurotransmitters that switches our brain on totally, okay? So if we are avoiding the big challenge, if we are avoiding challenging ourselves, if we're sitting back and waiting, if we're sitting on our laurels waiting for something like this pandemic to miraculously lift itself off of its own accord, and we just sit there and wait, we won't get flow. We need to be productive. And we need to be productive with things that are slightly out of our comfort zone. So if you have your to-do list, you need to pick the stuff there that's going to make you feel uncomfortable and get going. So the idea here is that you build resilience through flow by doing things that make you uncomfortable, to a point that you become comfortable being uncomfortable. So flow is really about switching on your brain, doing things that are a bit of a challenge. Now, the brain can't tell the difference from a neurotransmitter's perspective, whether that challenge is climbing a cliff face, or jumping out of a plane with a parachute on your back, or standing up and doing a speech, or braving the Zoom world and giving a webinar, or having a deep conversation with a loved one. Whatever it is that's going to make you feel uncomfortable, to the brain works the same. So if you are perhaps isolated at the moment and you don't have the typical challenges that you might expect to see when you go back to the new normal, you need to find other challenges that you can do within the remit of the space or environment you've got that actually will still build resilience in your brain. This is amazing, because you can actually train your brain doing difficult things at hand to prepare your brain to doing difficult things in the future. So here, the insight is train your brain doing difficult things now, challenge yourself in any way you can, because it's going to lend yourself, it's going to translate itself to dealing with bigger problems in the future where you've already built some resilience. So that's flow. The I is for impact. Again, we know that we perform at our best when we feel we're valued. It helps build our self-belief, our self-worth. And if we can quantify the impact we are making, if we consciously say, okay, I'm doing this and it's adding this sort of value, it's making this impact, in itself, it drives our performance. On the contrary, if we're flat, if we feel we're just like a hamster on a wheel, we're doing stuff, but we can't see the output or the result, we're doing things, but they don't seem to be making any difference to the situation, that deflates us and slows us down. So we need to be able to somehow quantify the impact we are making. What difference am I making? Now, the second level of impact is actually impact in what way? And the science also shows that impact to others is actually more powerful than impact which is self-serving. So if I can do something that's going to help someone else, I get more benefit than if I'm going to do something that's going to help me, which is really interesting. And this is fundamental evolution. This is why human beings have thrived as a species, because we're societal. We will make acts of selflessness in order to benefit the community. Okay, and this has allowed us to evolve to the highest level. So impact for others is another measurement and an element of the FIRE model, which talks about this whole purpose of life. So flow is very much you in your head doing things to be in the zone. Impact is very much, what am I doing with that to make a difference to other people? And it could be helping, it could be reaching out, it could be making a phone call, it could be helping your neighbor with their shopping, it could be helping an elderly person who can't leave the home, it could be giving to charity, it could be attending a helpline in your voluntary hours. It doesn't really make a difference what you do, as long as it's impact that's serving others. The R of the FIRE model is about roles. So we all accept roles, even if they are shoved on us sometimes. We typically have to make a decision at some point whether we fully accept those roles or not. And we need to think about our roles in the context of the wider perspective, stepping back and saying, okay, what is my role in this complex world, in this situation I'm in? Now, we wear many hats and we have different roles within our lives, and we need to concentrate time and effort into each and every one of those roles. If we don't have the time, we must not accept those roles because we will do them half-heartedly. So in an example, you may be working at home in this situation and you've got young kids and you're going crazy because you're a parent and you've got these young kids running around the house, but at the same time, you're also a manager or an employee who's trying to get a job done. And that conflict creates this discomfort in us. We start to feel guilty because we're not doing either of those well. We're saying, well, if I could just spend the time I need to spend with my kids, then I'd be able to sort them out, but I can't because I've got this work to do. We need to be able to compartmentalize, and we need to be able to metaphorically switch hats when we're switching roles to be able to put time towards the different roles that we have taken on. And I say this in keynote speeches, and I say this in webinars like this, and I always get, yeah, well, it's easier said than done. And it's true. In an ideal world, you close the door behind you as you leave to go to the office, and you're no longer a parent. You're now an employee in the business or managing the business. And then you come home, you put your briefcase down, and you're now a parent, and you have time to spend with family or your partner and kids. We don't have that today, and this is causing a lot of stress. Now you can perhaps divide up your home and say, okay, I'm going to work, and you move, as I do, to the roof. So my kids are downstairs and I'm upstairs and I'm at work. So I'm now with my work hat on doing my job. And when I go downstairs, I say, okay, I am now downstairs. I am now a parent and I'm going to find ways to spend quality time with my children or with my wife. We need to make sure that we keep some semblance of that identity to be able to understand the roles we're playing at different times of the day, particularly because we are confined in the space. Now, outside of a pandemic like this, we also need to make sure that we respect those boundaries, not just physically, not just because I'm in the office, but because when we're at the office, we get calls about things that are happening at home. And when we're at home, we're getting emails and messages and being pinged with work stuff. And automatically our brain starts getting confused. We are at our best, as I said, in flow when we can focus. And so we need to make sure that we balance ourselves well. This isn't about work-life balance from a time perspective. It's work-life balance from a focus perspective. I'd much rather spend one really deeply focused, detailed conversation with one of my daughters than spend the whole day with them whilst on the phone dealing with a work issue, not really listening to what they're saying or paying much attention to them. Or having an hour with my wife over dinner where we have deep conversation, rather than distractedly spending the whole weekend in Gozo, our sister island. But all I'm doing is constantly checking my emails to see if this business problem I'm stuck in is resolved. So we all suffer from these situations. It's very easy to say, there's nothing I can do about it. There is. Because actually, if you think about it from a productive perspective, you're much more productive when you're focused. Your brain is 3 times faster when you're in flow. So if you say, right, for this hour, I'm going to do work, even though I'm on holiday, you're going to get 3 hours of work done in an hour if you really focus and get into the zone doing it. Rather than spend the whole day worrying about something, distracted because you can't do anything about it, because you're 1,000 miles away when the airport's open on holiday after this. So remember, make sure you understand your roles, accept them fully, and take responsibility. Yeah, so it's not just about the role, it's about being responsible in that role, to compartmentalize when you're doing it, to do it at your best. Am I being the best dad possible at that time? Am I being the best manager possible at that time? Am I being the best at being a professional at that point in time? Moving on. Top performers are always seeking to better themselves. there's a way to do this that is proven to be much more effective than just simply putting hard work into something. There was a concept by Gladwell who said, I think it was Gladwell who said, you know, to reach mastery, you have to spend 10,000 hours practicing. Whether it's your golf swing or the art of public speaking or playing an instrument or being a good decision maker. Well, actually, it's not true. If we dissect that, you'll find that it's the way that you practice that actually moves you faster. And so what we need to be doing is finding time to develop a skill set to be able to excel so that we are a better version tomorrow than we are today of that particular role or responsibility. So if I am doing a webinar, how can I do my next webinar better than this one? The answer is I need to be self-aware of my mistakes, and I need to be able to get feedback, and I need to be able to act on that feedback if I think it's valid. So Excel is really about making sure you have the right people around you that can be sounding boards, whether it's a coach or a peer group or a masterclass or your colleagues or your employees. Being able to get feedback, to be able to raise your game on a consistent basis actually makes you a much better performer overall than signing up for a week to go for a course or get some sort of qualification. So this idea of continuous improvement, the Kaizen approach, is actually very, very valid when it comes to raising your game. And you typically do this in a less stressful way. What it requires, however, is effort that is very, very pinpoint focused. What is it I'm trying to do? You need to be specific, okay? If I want to improve my public speaking skills, it's not enough to say I want to improve my public speaking skills because I don't know where to focus. Do I need to work on my body language? Do I work on my tone? Do I work on my diction? Do I work on my PowerPoint? Or do I work on not using PowerPoint? More likely. You need to be specific. So in your to-do list, your things to do, especially now if you have the time, where is it that you need to excel? If you were trying to rebuild going out of this, where do you need to focus your efforts to be able to have an edge over your competitors? It's not just being better at what you used to do. It may be doing something completely different. It may be innovation. It could be invention. You don't know until you've asked the right questions. You need to get feedback and saying, what could we do better? And you need to have a vulnerability to accept that even if it's something you thought you did really well, and people say, well, perhaps you didn't, you accept that. Because that allows you to move forward. Going back to the CIA, once I accept something, then I can let it go and I can be productive. So receiving feedback about things I can do better or things I can do differently is the first step to excel. And then it's about putting effort into the detail, making sure that the way you do things is done properly. It doesn't mean you analyze to paralyze. Okay, there is an 80-20 rule there that you need to observe when it comes to productivity. I won't go too much into that detail, but it's really understanding a little bit more about how I can do something to become better at it. Be as good as you can be, and then move on to the next thing. So if I'm working with top executives, helping them on strategy, I will run something like this for their business as well. So I'd like to invite you to explore this, perhaps with your teams, and say, okay, within our organization, how can we get more flow? So this applies not just to you as an individual, but also to your teams. How can we get more flow? How can we create less distraction? How can we get more focus? How can we compartmentalize? How can we agree what it is that we want to achieve on a daily basis to be able to get in the zone? Because if goals are too far distant and vague, we really can't get engaged. It's about here and now and getting in there, getting stuck in. What about impact? Do we all agree that we're in this to be able to achieve a particular goal? What impact are we making? What's driving our self-belief that we're good at what we do? Why are people buying our product? Why will people come back to us after this is over? What is it that people recognize as our unique selling proposition or your value proposition? What is your impact? Roles. How do we divide the roles between us to run the organization? If I'm a single owner, do I compartmentalize well when I'm wearing my marketing hat versus my sales hat versus my technical hat versus my operational hat? You need to divide up your day. We talked earlier about family and you know, the out of work life and the work life, but the work life has many roles as well. If you're a small business owner, you definitely don't have the luxury to have, a marketing team, a sales team, a technical team, someone to run errands. You're doing a lot of stuff yourself. How do you make sure you don't get stuck into one particular role, typically the ones you enjoy most, and you sort of push aside the ones you don't like doing, like in my case, my accounts. And then you end up in a situation where you've forgotten something, or you haven't put enough energy into something, and it starts to break. So roles are important also within your working situation. And if you have a team, are you clear? Is everybody clear what the roles are, so that they can focus and be the best at those particular roles? And have they accepted those roles readily, or have you imposed those roles onto them? And whilst you're not looking, they perhaps get distracted because they don't really own those roles and those responsibilities. And the last part is, what are we doing as an organization, as a team, to become better versions of ourselves tomorrow? Are we collectively putting effort into developing ourselves? Are we, as a team, working to improve our familiarity, our candor, to be more open and trusting? Are we working with relationships with our customers, even though we haven't sold them anything, and we may not be selling them anything for months on end? How do we work on excelling in the relationship that we've got with them? What other things can we do with our clients that will keep them engaged? And they will continue to recognize us as the go-to people the minute that business is as usual, or as will be. So for me, fire is useful. If I am stuck in a rut, I typically sit back, a big glass of wine, in a quiet space, and I go, okay, what's really knocking me out of flow? Am I getting bored? Is there something that's not lighting my excitement and energy? Do I need a new challenge? Or is it the other way around? Is there something that's way out there, too big for me to comprehend, that I need to break down into challenges that I can take on piece by piece? What difference do I feel I'm making at the end of the day? Is it one of those days where I feel really busy but accomplishing nothing? I'm sure you've had one of those days. Yeah. Or can I feel actually I am making a difference and it is working, whatever I'm doing? And it's making a difference to other people too. My clients, people down the road, the economy, nature, friends, family, whatever, making a difference and feeling useful. And if I can, at the end of the day, tick those boxes, then I know it's been a good day. Okay, so I think Lou might want to come back online with her mic. I hope that was useful and I didn't talk too fast, as I tend to. But we have time for questions.
We do, and we have some questions, let me tell you. Now,
answer.
Remember,
I need to fix as well.
Yes, yeah, no, just
subliminal marketing for Microsoft.
Yeah, it's a little marketer in me. I'm like, oh, there's a C missing. Oh, I'll just put that little C in Excel.
Microsoft Excel. You got it wrong.
Okay, brilliant. All right, so yeah, we've had some questions. My goodness. So if anyone does have any more questions, please do pop them into the Q&A section. I absolutely loved when you talked about work-life balance, and it's not about time, it's about focus. And today I actually took half an hour out, rather than leaving my 2.5-year-old running around everywhere, to paint with her, to actually focus some specific time on her, rather than just saying, here darling, here's your tablet, here's this, here's that. Mummy's working. Because now when I talk to her, she goes, I'm busy. And I'm like, oh no, that's me talking to her. So that was really impactful for her today, because I saw that she actually focused more on her own stuff because she had some just me and her time, and it was really valuable for me. So Megan says, in fact, I'm not going to tell you anyone else's names now, but do you find that you can apply the same mindfulness techniques you use in exercise to other areas of your life, like stress management or multitasking maybe?
In principle, yes, because what you're trying to do is activate particular parts of your brain through paying attention, through internal attention. Now, a simple way to do that is obviously deep breathing exercises. So when I'm running, I may very well try and create a cyclical breathing rhythm with my steps, and that in itself starts to get me to get into the zone. What's also important is that you are cognizant of the voice in your head, because it's very easy for you to get distracted and let your thoughts wander, and that's not always productive. You can get some creative ideas through that, but it's not necessarily productive. So So if I am trying to be mindful about something, I need to start off in the right way and make sure I empty my mind and then bring whatever it is I want to focus on, even in the middle of a run, right in front of me. So, I may leave the house saying, oh, I've got a lot of things to do. I've got a task list and I need to be back to do this and I've got that. And my wife asked me to get her this. And that's not going to help. I need to empty everything out and then say, what is the one thing that I can focus on at this point in time? And if it's something that's thought, sorted, done, dusted, put on the shelf, out of the way, then I can bring another box in and unravel that one. Situationally, I think it needs to be what you enjoy. So if in my case, I enjoy a quiet run in the countryside, that does it for me. If you prefer sitting quietly, next to a stream nearby where you live, absolutely. If it's a good book in which you lose yourself, or music is extremely effective. These are very personal. And if you're not used to doing this, if you're very new to this, my best suggestion is you experiment rather than just go with what someone tells you, because you never know what works for you. My mom gets in the zone when she's doing jigsaw puzzles. That's her thing, so it's all different.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. We're all unique in how we manage our situations and our lives. The next one we have is, love your description of micromanaging. Yeah, I thought that was really good too. It causes so many problems in large organizations. In fact, that was a comment rather than a question. I'm going through this chronologically from what has been given to us. We hear a lot of advice in the media about listening to our bodies. How do you tell if you've hit the mental wall and should push on, or if you should stop and listen to your body?
The short answer is you don't know, you have to try. So in every experience where I've hit that wall, and it could be a physical wall, which then translates into an emotional wall. So I've been in situations where I've been completely broken, passed out or end up in hospital because I've pushed myself too far. What happens with mental strength and build resilience over time, over years, is that your mind becomes stronger than your body. And so your body's saying, give up, and your mind says, no, a bit further, and then you hurt yourself. So it's very important, if you are a go-getter, if you're a sort of type A character that wants to push the boundaries all the time, that you have that objectivity to step away from the ego that is driving you to push further just because. And that I've learned the hard way by actually damaging myself. By pushing too far. And so you reflect back in your hospital bed saying, okay, I think I went past the limit. But typically what happens is then that becomes the new limit. So your comfort zone stretches as you push it. What I find actually most of the time is the opposite. We have so much more in the tank that we could give, but we don't, because we think we're nearly on empty. But actually, one more step leads to one more step, leads to one more step, and actually you realize there was quite a bit more you could go. Where at first you thought, I think I'm probably at my limit, you probably were well away from it at that time. So err on the side of caution by all means, but be curious about what that limit is, and it doesn't have to be a physical challenge. The most memorable, uncomfortable moments in my life were decisions around, a family member being ill, my father being in a coma after a very bad illness. These are the things which really sort of try you, which really push your mental limits. But actually, rather than just saying, okay, it passed now, my dad's fine, thanks God for that, and just move on, you actually stop and reflect and say, okay, how well did I cope in that situation? What was the voice in my head saying? How do I recognize that if I'm in a situation that's similar? God forbid, but similar. And so it's about learning from the experiences of being at that edge, the just beyond the comfort zone. That's where it's an amazing place. And I find that the best way for me to get to that is to really push my physical limits. And that's where I really get out of my own head and I'm in a completely different world. When you've been running for, I think my longest run, running for 28 hours non-stop. Your legs have given up way before. It's the mind game. It's the voice in your head. It's the chemicals going around. The good stuff and the bad stuff. And for me, it's fascinating to be in that headspace at that particular point in time. You can't do it too often. but when you can, it's amazing.
God knows what is going on in your head. I mean, I don't think I would ever get to that place, Nathan, to know after running 28 hours where my head would be at.
Yeah, but the thing is, for me, it's that, you know, for someone else who's not trained, that's going to be after an hour. For someone who is struggling to learn how to play a musical instrument, it may be after 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's where the frustration comes in and you want to, kill something. That's when you go, okay, what's happening? Stop. What's going on in there? And that's the point where you need to be able to catch yourself.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got some more questions, so just keep coming in. How can we keep, and some of this we also covered, we did a remote working webinar, so get in touch with me if you want access to that. But we did, how can we keep the team motivated since we don't have face-to-face interaction?
It's tough. It's tough because typically what happens is that there's a belief system around this about, our auras and the way that we influence people just by being physically present. And I think, there is some truth in that from the feedback we're getting from people not interacting in the same space. So there must be some truth in this sort of energy that we exude when we're with people, especially with people that we like. So it is difficult. But one thing for sure is that using a leadership coaching approach, which means that you are the person that asks the right questions and spend most of your time listening, allows you to be able to work with the issues much more effectively than you perhaps trying to be the motivator or the encourager or trying to tell people how they should cope or tell people things they can do to be able to manage the situation. Because, as leaders, we typically want to take responsibility for others. The example was, how do I take care of my team? By telling them, oh, you should do some exercise, or make sure you take breaks, or change your environment if you can, or stuff that works for you. But the most important thing we can do is listen. And we have built trust over time, and they do trust you enough to tell you what they are feeling. Then you're going to get much more out of a conversation, even on Zoom, than being physically present in a very busy office where people perhaps want to open up because there's an employee listening in. So I think, the constraint of actually being in the situation is very, very powerful because it forces or encourages, let's say, more one-to-one conversations. And this is a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to spend time one-to-one with my team, which perhaps in the busyness of the office, I don't have that time. So for me, this is a blessing. I mean, the amount of stuff I'm learning about my team by having my one-to-ones, because I don't feel obliged to rush from one thing to the next, is actually going to make me a better leader to them and have a stronger relationship with them after this when we go back to the office.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really interesting stuff, that, and it makes me think there are, if you want some actual real life examples as well for the person that asked that, there are different things that you can do to motivate people. When you're looking at communication online, what we found when you work in this kind of environment is that, having this video, you're seeing Nathan and I at the moment, and one of my clients said to me the other day that they were on a call, and they've often been on the conference calls with a colleague, but they don't have their video going. And I know it's not for everyone having a video, but they often found that person would pause before they answered. And they found that really difficult because they wanted to say something. They were like, oh no, what's wrong? Why have they paused? But when they started doing video calling more, she actually realized that he was thinking. And so she could see the expression on his face. And so she relaxed and she could sit there. But there are lots of things that you can do to motivate. We have a blog, and we'll send you the link to that, a blog post which covers about tips for remote working as well. And there are some fun things in there to motivate your team. So anyone that's attended this webinar, we'll send you a follow-up email and just have a look at that blog. I know we're kind of at time, but I do want to, there are two questions I'd like, thank you. So I've had one here. How does one operate flow in an open office? So I guess they mean like an open plan office.
Yep. So for flow, there are a number of triggers, as I said earlier. Now, when you're in an open office, there's two types of flow you want to create. One is for yourself, Okay, so that's your own personal flow, and that's really about trying to find ways to remove distraction, whether it's putting on noise canceling headphones, or finding a quiet space, or picking up your laptop and go and sit on in the garden outside. Avoiding distraction is very important for flow. If you cannot do that, you need to be able to signal to people that you are in concentration mode. Okay, so I have a client. We were working on getting flow, the second part of flow, which is the social flow, which I'll talk about next, within a very, very busy office. It was like a type of call center with traders in it. Now, what we did is we created signals that people could use to say respectfully, leave me alone. Okay, and that could be, a soft toy, which is, the right way up or upside down, or it could be their mug that's upside down or the right way up, or something that's signaling someone who's going to just barge in and start talking and offload their problem onto someone who's trying to concentrate on a task at hand. So this signaling is important. So getting your head into something is important. Organizing yourself is important. Making sure you compartmentalize your day and say, okay, this is thinking time. This is action time. Here's I'm going to work on this project. Then I'm going to work on this. Then I'm going to spend half an hour answering emails. Then I'm going to check my social media while I have a coffee. If you look at my calendar, every single half an hour, it has a description, and I stick to it. Now, yes, there are inevitables. You're sitting trying to concentrate, and your boss keeps interrupting and saying, can you do this for me? Okay. This is where you start to create a culture of flow and start to make sure that the whole organization understands this way of being. And what will happen is that people become more respectful of each other's space. And so when we're all allowed to be in flow at the same time, then I'm worried about my own flow. I'm not coming and destructing yours. The Swedish have a concept called coffee time. And what they say is this: let's work for 45, 50 minutes on focus, and then let's have 10 minutes and we'll all get up and go and have a coffee together. So they all happen to meet at the coffee or the water cooler at that specific time, rather than people getting up and out and up and out and distraction lasting a whole hour. So you've got 50 minutes of silence and then 10 minutes of mayhem, and then going back to 50 minutes of silence. And so they've organized themselves in this particular way, and it does work. Social flow is much more powerful when there is familiarity, however. Okay, so this is where your team building comes in. All right, so if I am familiar, if there is candor, if I can be open and trusting, and if I can show vulnerability, which then leads to emotional intelligence and this mutual respect, then people will recognize my state of mind without me having to put up signals. I can see that you are concentrating, so therefore I won't come and disrupt your attention span. I might send you a note saying, when you're ready, let me know and I'll come over. And so this mutual understanding creates a bit of a hive mind, so everybody sort of thinks the same way, which really makes it for a very powerful culture. But it has to be taught, and it has to be understood, and it has to be accepted. You can't, as the CEO, come in and say, right, from now on, we're going to do it this way, because people get into flow in different ways. But there has to be a mutual understanding that this is beneficial for the business. And as a leader, if you are a leader, you being respectful of your employees' time, not thinking you can just barge in and interrupt because you need something. Your time is more important than theirs. No, it isn't. So it's really up to you to take that responsibility and say, okay, can this hold off? Or is it really an urgent issue that is worth messing with the mind of this particular individual who's trying to get into flow?
I bet one of my members of my team is on here, and I bet she was like, yeah, Lou, your time is not as important, not more important than mine. Okay, so the last one we've got here is, earlier this year, I left my job to reconsider my career and what I want to be doing. Things didn't go to plan because of COVID, and I am now back to where I started at the same job because I have to pay the bills. I know that you changed through different careers. How do you know what to do next and where you wanted to go while still paying for the bills?
Okay, so my first point is, you're not back to square one. You've had an experience. Okay, so you're not the same person that left that job going back to that job. Yeah, you've changed significantly because you've taken a leap of faith. You've done what 99% of people won't do, which is take a risk. Okay, and it didn't work out. But you're definitely not the same person as you were when you left that job. Okay, so that's very important that you recognize that, because that is a skill set. Okay, you've done it once, you can do it again, anytime you want. Now, for me, there's two ways of looking at this. And one is a change caused by a push, or a change caused by a pull. I've always changed by a pull. Okay, a push is, there's a burning building, I need to jump out. Yeah, I hate my job. It's boring. It doesn't give me satisfaction. I'm fed up of it. I need something else. Okay, when you leave that, you leave in a different way than being pulled out of a particular state. And why is that? Because when you're moving away from something, okay, you typically haven't exhausted all creative opportunities to make that work. Why? Because when you leave something, if it's so bad, your mindset is going to make that laugh. Okay, you're in fight or flight response. So you either fight and you have your arguments, and then you flight, you give up. When you're doing that, you're not creating a better place for you. Now, if you try something and it doesn't work, what you need to be able to do is stay creative. Have you tried everything? All right. I've been in situations where I've thought of leaving, and I've said, let me give it another try. But not by just doing the same old, but by reinventing myself. Could be changing my role, changing my responsibilities, doing something differently, working with a different client group. And actually you reignite that energy, and you build that satisfaction back up. So that has happened before. But typically it's a pull. It's a pull because there's something I haven't achieved yet I'd like to achieve. And I will look internally and say, can I get this here? And I realize I can't. And I say, okay, then I need to move. Okay? And so if I look at my careers, I started off in healthcare, in the health industry, and I did that, and I wanted to become an entrepreneur. So what did I do? I became an entrepreneur in the health sector because I knew that sector and I had the strengths there. And I wanted to become an entrepreneur, and I got that fix by setting up my own clinical practice. And so I started to learn about marketing and bringing clients, customer care, and managing the books, and developing strategy, etc., etc. And I said, okay, this is fine, but now I'm getting bored of healthcare. Now I've had this appetite for leadership. So where can I transfer that? And then I went into hospitality. And I started leading organizations within hospitality, health spas. So a health thread still running through that because of my expertise, but in a much more corporate way. So learning the skills there. And so continuing to try and excel and improve my skills. But there's always a pull. So I got to a point where I said, okay, I'm low on impact. You know, I'm working for this big company that's a great company to work for and really does invest and had invested in me. But I felt I wasn't making that much of a difference. I was waking up in the morning saying, I'm doing a good job. My clients are happy. But why? So impact was missing. And so I decided to move into the nonprofit world. And I started working in organizations that were actually making the world a better place. You know, working with disability, working with people who are vulnerable, starting to move into sort of the more, I would say political, but sort of the lobbying side of things to change laws, change the way things are being done, and learn to develop my skills in that space, which helped me then develop the skills to be in a boardroom, to be a CEO or a chair of organizations, to be able to make sure that I can work with high-level teams to get the job done. So it's always an evolution. Nothing. It's never you know, from black to white. It's always a transition. But what you have to look for, you know, so this is my story, but to you, it's what's the pull? So not what's the push, what's pushing me out? You know, what's the pull? Is it the pull of the excitement of being your own boss? Is it the pull of deciding what time you want to wake up in the morning rather than be told to? Is it the pull of saying, I love the excitement and the stress of not having a salary at the end of the month, which may be more or less than what I used to earn, and how do I go through that? Is it being self-sufficient and satisfaction of actually knowing that you're carrying your own weight? Whatever it is, you need to identify what is pulling you, because that's the motivator. If you're leaving because you're being pushed by whatever the situation is, then you may make mistakes when you decide what your next step is.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. That really resonates with me as well. I mean, I've been pushed in the respect twice of redundancy, but I've taken it as an opportunity. And, you know, I set up as a consultant, and then it's turned into, you know, business where I now employ people, and it's been a fantastic thing. And I have to say that person that made that comment I mean, how incredibly brave of you to actually leave your job, to take time out to think, what am I actually going to do? And then go back. I think, you know, that is absolutely fantastic. And that just shows how committed you are to your future and what you want to do. You didn't let things hold you back and say, oh, I can't go back there. You went back there. It's absolutely brilliant. Nathan, I don't want to take up too much of your time now because we're over. I mean, amazing. We've still got loads of people. We only had a couple of people drop off, so they've clearly been loving this session. I'd like to thank you so very much for attending this session. Nathan and I are working on a number of strategy and working with businesses on, well, on the strategy and also on business support. So if there's anything you specifically need from us, please do let us know. You can find us online as well. You can find Nathan online and the different businesses, can't even speak, that he's involved with. So if you do have any questions, please do get in touch with us separately. I forgot to tell you, Nathan, that we were streaming live on Facebook because that's the joy of Zoom. So anyone that, yeah, I shared it on my personal one as well, and Nathan and I have friends in common in Malta. So any of like our Maltese friends were like, oh, look, Nathan's got a beard now. So he may, when he was getting ping, ping coming through, that could have been people going, oh. Yeah, so thank you so much, everybody. And we'll send you a follow-up email with some links through so that you can see Nathan's business, but also to some of the information that we mentioned. Thanks so much. And oh, look, lovely. We're getting some Welsh in here as well. I can see that we've got some librarians in here as well. So we're getting a bit of Welsh to say love it. Don't ask me to say diolch both. I hope that was right. They've gone now, so hey ho. But yes, we're getting some really nice comments coming through. So thanks so much, Nathan, and wish you all the best. And I'll speak to you soon.
So
thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
Okay.